were contained in the media a week ago regarding the adjudicated tenders which were not awarded. I want to take this opportunity to welcome and introduce all the delegations. Firstly, our SANRAL board chairperson, Mr. Themba Mhambi, and all members of the board present here, and those that have dialed in virtually, our colleagues from DOT, delegation from the ministry, executives from SANRAL, and senior management from SANRAL present here. I will hand over to Mr. Mhambi to introduce our minister. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone present here today, and indeed we must express our gratitude to all of you for joining us, both here physically and virtually. I do believe that the interest in this conference is so massive that just a few minutes ago I think there was a mention of 126 people or so who had shown an interest in linking up virtually. And I can tell you that some of us are not at all comfortable being in front of the media like this, but circumstances dictate that we do today. It is my pleasure to say to all of you, we've been waiting for the past 10 or so minutes for our minister, and he is here now. And indeed, as one says that, one should also apologize to all of you for keeping you waiting while we were finalizing a few logistical issues. So without any further ado, colleagues, given that you've been waiting for too long, it is my pleasure to present the Minister of Transport to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chairperson of the board and members of the board of SANRAL present here, the acting group CEO of SANRAL, members of the media. We have taken note of the reports relating to the cancellation of 5 tenders with a collective value of 17.4 billion rand. These are strategic projects that are critical in growing our economy as part of our investments in the infrastructure. Good governance is a key tenet of our service delivery mandate, and we will not compromise its underlying principles for expediency. We have learned invaluable lessons from the advent of state capture, which brought to the fore lapses that paralyzed strategic organs of state through rampant corruption that was left unchecked for too long. We have seen at PRASA how the malfeasance and irregular contracts compromised service delivery and delayed the implementation of its modernization program by close to a decade, with major contracts held up in the courts. Today, we are still paying the price for those irregularities and corrupt practices. SANRAL is a strategic state-owned company that plays a major role in building and managing our national road network that drives our economy and connecting our centers of economic activity to the markets. It remains one of our best performing entities with a good track record and delivering mega projects. The SANRAL board, as its accounting authority, is bound by its fiduciary duties in terms of SANRAL Act the Companies Act and Public Finance Management Act. The board must at all times act in the best interest of the company. SANRAL is responsible for major projects that are critical in giving forward momentum to economic recovery and growth. The track record of SANRAL over the 2 decades of its existence has given us comfort that it has the requisite capacity and skills to execute its mandate. We have no reason to believe otherwise. I've directed the board to provide me with a detailed report in line with its responsibilities as enshrined in the relevant laws. The minister has no role in the procurement processes, and we have no interest in the identity of the bidders. Our only interest is to ensure that the board has given expression to the letter and spirit of the SANRAL Act and other applicable prescripts in the exercise of its responsibilities. Furthermore, the strategic nature of the projects in question requires of us to ensure that governance principles are not undermined and that the adjudication process can withstand scrutiny. We must do everything in our power to ensure that the integrity of the award process is not brought into question. Failure to uphold supply chain management principles will result in awards being challenged in courts, holding up the implementation of the project. We have first-hand experience at PRASA on such litigation that has the potential to hold up projects for years. Those who are aggrieved by the decisions of the board in this regard have recourse in law and can approach the courts to adjudicate the matter. It is my intention to hold the board accountable for its decisions and to ensure that it acts in the best interest of the company and the country. The strategic nature of the project SANRAL is responsible for require that the company be circumspect in handling procurement matters and ensure probity in the award of contracts. I will therefore not hesitate to act against the board if there is evidence that the board was derelict in the execution of its fiduciary duties. It is equally my expectation that the board will not hesitate to implement consequence management against those found culpable for the lapses that have resulted in the decision not to award these tenders. In conclusion, it is in our collective interest for SANRAL to find a remedy to the adjudication lapses that considers the strategic nature of these projects and minimize the delay leading to the award of these tenders. We are unequivocal in our resolve not to tolerate malfeasance for expediency in any of our entities. The board will take the nation into confidence on the decisions it has taken in relation to these tenders and the steps it intends to take in addressing the procurement lapses. And I wish to concur with the chairperson that it was not either their intention or their resolve to confront this matter head on. They were persuaded by me that we cannot allow matters of this nature in the public domain to just be generated and then be subjected to rumors and perceptions. When you are a government and you are accountable, you account and you confront even the difficulties head on. There are people who have been calling me, who some of them I believe are part of the tenderpreneurs who have tendered here. One thing I wish to address them about today is that They are asking me to do things in the dark, which were condemned in the state capture. That's not how we run this country. You cannot ask the minister to intervene on matters of tenders, which were condemned not so long ago in the state capture. But the same people in the dark, they leak matters to the media, and then they come to the minister through their telephones and basically ask me to switch on and off the board and call Ntate Mohambi and his board to do this left. And let me tell them, I will not do it, because I owe them nothing. I owe them nothing. I am a free soul. I am not owned by anybody. I'm not owned by anybody. And I'm not going to repeat the mistakes that were being not only warned, but have landed us in trouble as a country through the Zondo Commission, which have laid the law very clear what happened. We can't go back there. My job as a minister is to hold the board accountable and account to Parliament. I've got no business with tenders. If you've got a problem with a tender, as a person who have tendered, go to court. Do anything in your power to get your tender to be addressed properly. The board has got a fiduciary duty to act. And if they don't act ethical, they act in the interest of their own, and I get to find that government will act on such a board, because we are all called upon to act in an ethical way and not go backwards, where we do things and we have deals with people and try to switch on and there on things that don't need us. I'm equally concerned. And I wanted, as I arrived, because Mtentu is one of the bridges that are the biggest projects in this country. And when I arrived as a minister, the first thing I raised was Mtentu, because it was stopped because of people who were demanding 10%. And people who were on the project had to pack and go, and the project closed down in KZN. And my job was to go down, meet with the stakeholders, resolve the issues, let the board do its job, get the tenders back on track. I've got no other interest either than to ensure that the massive projects create jobs and they lead us back to recovery. We can't go backwards. We can't go backwards. And if you want to talk to me, don't talk to me over the phone, just write it down so that I can read what you are complaining about. We are not friends. When we are sent to jail as ministers for doing corrupt things, you are alone. And that there is nobody who is involved in tenders who's going to help you. And when the president wants answers, he wants them from me, not from a tender premier. I must account. And when South Africans want answers, you as the media, you want them from me, not from tender premiers. And I want those answers from the board. So I want SANRAL to clarify this matter. Consequence management. How are we moving forward? And I want us to move forward with the speed of a lightning, because we can't hold back on this particular project. We've got a lot of catalytic projects we're implementing with SANRAL. Some are in Mpumalanga, some are in KZN. Wonderful job that we're doing. So we've got to cover the space and the time to ensure that we move with agility and ensure that there is service delivery, but at the same time we create jobs. And the infrastructure department in the presidency also equally want answers from us in relation to these matters, and we move with speed. And I suppose before end of the week we'll also meet and give them a feedback as they work together with SANRAL to deliver on these major catalytic projects in terms of infrastructure. So I thank you very much and thank you for your time. And then I'll give over to the board to lead in the next presentation. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you, Minister, for that input, which sets the scene for the presentation that's going to be made by the board chairperson. It's now by singular privilege that I invite the chairperson to come and read the board statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister, and Vusi, thanks also for the platform. I've already tendered our apologies for the late start, and indeed I will now go on to read a very, very long statement. Please bear with us, because the attacks on us over the past week or two have been incessant, and they do require that we really go to town in trying to put our position across. And indeed, as the minister instructed us to explain ourselves to the country, even though ordinarily we would not be dealing with tender issues publicly, but simply because we had been placed in that invidious position. So this is our statement on media reports on the non-award of tenders, specifically 5 tenders, which are now public knowledge. We must begin with a disclaimer that it is totally inappropriate for matters to do with tenders to be debated publicly by bidders on those tenders and the organizations concerned. Over the past week, bidders on tenders not approved for award by SANRAL have gone public and disseminated negative information about the board's decisions in relation to those tenders. Regrettably, the media reports contain a number of comments, some of which demonstrate a lack of full and proper understanding of how decisions on procurement at SANRAL are made. It is of utmost importance, therefore, that the SANRAL board ensures that there is compliance with procurement processes in all forms, inclusive of compliance with binding resolutions, in order to uphold the applicable fiduciary duties of the board. As a board, we have a responsibility to uphold and enforce proper governance within SANRAL. We have all seen organizations fail because of problems at the governance level. Ineffective governance has compromised the ability of many state-owned entities to deliver on their core mandates. The SANRAL board, for at least the time we are here, will not go down that path. The board of SANRAL generally plays no part in the awarding of contracts. Contracts above the value of 750 million rand are placed before the contracts committee of the board for review and noting after the adjudication of tenders by the management bid adjudication committee, which we call MBEC. The contracts committee considers, among others, the proactive assurance reports on such contracts that are compiled by the proactive assurance structures, those being our internal audit and our legal department, as well as our risk management department. If there are unresolved matters between the proactive assurance structures and MBEC, or a difference of opinion between the SCM committees themselves, those matters are escalated to the board by the contracts committee for decision by the board. The board seeks legal opinion as required and makes the appropriate decision to either note the adjudicated award or to note but not approve the intention to award, as is the case with the tenders at issue today. Although the board is not operationally involved in the awarding of contracts, as SANRAL's accounting authority, it must account for decisions at SANRAL. And therefore the board must exercise appropriate oversight, which includes ensuring the implementation of the law, relevant regulations, resolutions, and policies. Now I go on to deal with our constitutional and PFMA imperatives. The SANRAL board, as the accounting authority, is enjoined by Section 51 of the Public Finance Management Act of 1999 to inter alia ensure that SANRAL has and maintains an effective, efficient, and transparent system of financial and risk management and internal control. An appropriate procurement and provisioning system which is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. That comes straight from the Constitution. A system for properly evaluating all major capital projects prior to a final decision on the project. Accordingly, the SANRAL board is authorized and empowered by the Constitution and the PFMA to ensure that it safeguards the integrity of the procurement processes within SANRAL. In keeping with this, the SANRAL board adopted a resolution on 28 January 2020, which is detailed later in this document for the reasons already mentioned. And that particular resolution is actually at the heart of the matters we are dealing with. Now I want to talk, as the minister also did, about the Zondo Commission, because it would be seriously derelict on our part as this board not to pay attention to a commission which was established specifically to take this country out of the malaise and pathology of irregularities in procurement, and therefore handing over the country to interests that are inimical with our stated objective to create employment, bring about equality in this country, and ensure the prosperity of our citizens. In its conclusions and recommendations in relation to a major state-owned company, the Zondo Commission repeatedly refers to Section 50 of the PFMA as a section violated by the accounting authority of that public entity, leading to the Commission recommending criminal prosecution for members of the then board of that public entity. The Commission highlights, among others, the following obligations in terms of the PFMA: acting with fidelity, integrity, and in the best interest of the public entity in managing the financial affairs of that entity. The obligation to take effective and appropriate steps to prevent irregular expenditure, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, not complying with the operational policies of that public entity. The Commission goes on to cite Section 86, subsection 2 of the PFMA, which criminalizes willful or grossly negligent failure on the part of members of accounting authorities to comply with sections 50 and 51 of the PFMA. We invoke the Zondo Commission because it seems some of the bidders for the tenders SANRAL has decided to re-advertise have learnt nothing from the Commission. They think we are still in the past when bidders could apply public and political pressure on public organizations to award them tenders irrespective of the provisions of the PFMA. This is how state capture was born, and it is how SANRAL will end up captured, if it isn't already, if none among its accounting authority, management, staff, and stakeholders do not respect legislative prescripts pertaining to public procurement. I go on to talk about attacks on the SANRAL board. Over the last week, this board has been subjected to public vilification, intense emotional blackmail, and veiled intimidation by being told it had cancelled presidential projects and how it should have gone to National Treasury and our line minister when it found any matters of concern with the tenders. Now we want to emphasize here that we have not cancelled any project. No project has been cancelled because no project had been awarded to anybody. What the board did not approve was our MBEC's intention to award these tenders because of lapses and violations we found as the board, and which we are obliged in terms of the law to question and to ensure do not pass if we are convinced in good faith that they should not pass. The subtext of this attack on the board is that we have undermined these important people and structures. That is the President, our Minister, and National Treasury, by not endorsing the proposed awards. And therefore, we must be dealt with as brainless, delinquent, and intransigent children. In shameless and selfish efforts to even turn the South African public against us, we have been presented as killers of the construction industry and portrayed as suppressors of job creation. Pure blackmail. Pure blackmail. What is deliberately hidden from the public is that we have, in 2 of those tenders, thwarted the very killing of part of that industry and the very suppression of job creation for ordinary people, which would have happened if we had allowed those tenders to be awarded. And I'm going to be specific. We have frustrated the total irregular exclusion of subcontracting in the Mtentu tender and the reduction by a massive 50% of the routine 30% subcontracting in the GFIP tender. Mtentu, no subcontracting had been built into the tender. Therefore, that community and the business people there would have lost 30% of what would have been due to them from a subcontracting point of view. And if you recall, as the minister indicated, the people of Mtentu vociferously stood against their deprivation from economic opportunities in that erstwhile tender of Mtentu. Now, how do we, as the SANRAL board, management, and staff, go back to Mtentu and say, here's a new project, but the 30% subcontracting that you've been expecting is not going to happen. That would be a recipe for disaster, compromising SANRAL and that project, and we were not about to allow it. This exclusion and reduction, which were decided by unauthorized individuals and structures without board approval. If you look at the combined amount to subcontractors, and we're talking here about SMMEs of designated groups being denied and deprived of plus minus 2 billion rand in business opportunities. 2 billion rand of subcontracting which should have happened as part of these tenders was being withheld from SMMEs and ordinary people. And we, as this board, took a stance that we are not going to allow it and let the heavens fall on us if need be. Because our transformation policy is one of the best in this country. And we could not countenance a situation where that policy was effectively undermined and compromised and trampled upon by decisions that were not approved by this board. And effectively taking that 2 billion rand and giving it to the main contractors in relation to Mtetu and the GFIP contracts, with the GFIP one reduced by 50% in terms of subcontracting, and the Mtetu one, no subcontracting in real terms. All of this amounts to thousands of South Africans denied job opportunities. And therefore you must tell us who, between those who are saying our action is depriving our people of job opportunities, and us who are fighting for this 30% on both tenders, who between the two is on the side of job creation? Who between the two is concerned about businesses in this country? And we are talking about SMMEs in the main. It is this board which is defending those economic participation and empowerment rights of those people. But to fool the public, some of the bidders have angrily created the impression that they have the best interests of those people at heart, when in fact those SMMEs and local communities would be largely kept out of benefiting from the projects if this board had not seen through this injustice and allowed the current tenders to be awarded as they were proposed to be. They say this board is killing the industry. We invite you, and we've got documents here which our CEO and management will share with you. We invite you to objectively check the records of awards and payments made to the industry over the past 3 years of this board's stewardship of SANRAL. The facts are that over the past 3 years, based on records from our management, SANRAL has awarded a total of 16.1 billion rand to the engineering consulting part of the industry and 27 billion rand to the contracting component of the industry. Overall, if you consider the industry in its totality, over the past 3 years, SANRAL has awarded just shy of 50 billion rand to the industry. One of the leaders on the attack on this board has received, during the said 3 years, 21% of the 27 billion rand awarded in construction contractor jobs. Just one. One of the leaders in attacking us in the past 3 years, has gotten 21% of this 27 billion rand we are talking about from SANRAL. And just because they had their eyes on some of this work, some of these leaders of this attack have decided to vilify and malign us in public for doing what the laws of this country compel us to do. In fact, some of the major players in the industry have, as recently as last week, announced maintaining a record order book, thanks in part to SANRAL tenders. So much that they have said they have so much work that they can afford to wait for work in the future. Because the facts contradict this nefarious assertion that we're killing the industry, we can only surmise that this is nothing but a gambit aimed at breeding government and public antipathy towards a board which is frustrating plans for the external influence over this public entity. We think people want to control us. And I am glad that the minister has himself said he receives phone calls from them to deal with us, when in actual fact we don't involve the minister as far as tenders are concerned. I will later on indicate that the minister asked me when he was at the PICC, Mr. Mhambi, why am I hearing here at the PICC that you have not awarded tenders relating to critical projects? I said to the minister, with due respect, Minister, we would never do that. We would never tell you about tenders we have awarded or not awarded. And the reason is the law. These processes are supposed to be dealt with cleanly, with integrity. One of our board members, Rob, uses the expression squeaky clean when we deal with these matters. And he should know better. He is almost twice my age. We place, I was saying, please check SANRAL awards and payments over the recent past, and you will be shocked to see that some of the leaders of the attack on this board are the very entities which have been benefiting more than others from SANRAL procurement. The question we must ask and answer then is if this recent non-award hasn't interfered with a culture of entitlement that has been built over the years in relation to the relationship of some of these entities with SANRAL. How else can we explain the amount of vitriol spewed at this board for executing its fiduciary responsibility and duty to the organization and the people of South Africa? We place on record here today that our response to any bid tendered has always been, currently is, and will always be based solely on the law. We therefore consider the invocation of the President, our Minister and National Treasury in this matter by some bidders to be mischievous and bordering on illegality. Procurement disputes are not adjudicated upon by those individuals and structures. They don't get involved in procurement disputes. Not the president, not our minister, not National Treasury, actually not even God. But they are adjudicated by the law courts. Procurement disputes are not resolved through public pressure via the media, but through the objectivity and independence of our country's law courts. The invocation of authorities above this board to not so subtly compel us to endorse proposed awards we have refused to endorse is a blatant call for the corruption of public procurement, which requires that as an accounting authority we must apply our minds independently of any external influence and act only in terms of relevant legislation and policies in pronouncing on tenders. We may, under no circumstances, involve the President, our Minister, National Treasury, and indeed any other individual or structure outside properly appointed independent advisors who have no interest in the bids in making those determinations. It is for that reason that our Minister heard for the first time about our decision on those tenders at a meeting of the Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Commission, which structure itself got to hear about our decision when it requested an update on the status of economic recovery projects as part of the stimulation of the economy, of course. In the 3 years plus of its existence, this board has never discussed procurement within SANRAL outside internal, relevant, formal processes. We've never done it, and we will not do it now. Section 27 of the Constitution provides that an organ of state, if authorized by law, may contract for goods and services on behalf of the government. However, the tendering system it devises must be fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. One of the primary reasons for the express inclusion of the 5 principles in Section 217, subsection 1 of the Constitution is to safeguard the integrity of the government procurement process. The inclusion of the principles, in addition to ensuring the prudent use of public resources, is also aimed at preventing corruption. Compliance with the requirements of a valid tender process is peremptory, and it is not open to a state entity to simply disregard these, as to hold otherwise would undermine the integrity of the procurement process. This would be inimical with the obligation of ensuring fairness, equity, transparency, competitiveness, and cost-effectiveness in public procurement. It is for that reason, among others, that the board took exception to a recommendation for a bidder who should have been disqualified to be awarded the tender as part of these 5 tenders. There was a recommendation that we award to a bidder who should actually have been disqualified when we started checking the facts. And in another instance, the disqualification of a bidder who should have been considered for award. One of the cases, a bidder who should have been considered all the way was disqualified along the way. And we were not about to entertain that and to approve it as this board. Very crucially, the PFMA says the accounting authority of the public entity must comply and ensure compliance by the public entity with the provisions of the Act and any other legislation applicable to the public entity. It does not make this compliance optional. There is no exception. Whatever position you hold, however powerful you may be, you are not exempt from this. And as this board, we have a very, very clear understanding of that, and we are not confused. Now, I deal with reasons for board decisions. Let us now talk about how the Board of SANRAL went out of its way to give effect to its fiduciary obligations referred to above and in terms of the PFMA. We refer in particular to the obligation of preventing irregular expenditure and fruitless and wasteful expenditure. We refer as well to the obligation to ensure effective internal controls and the obligation to ensure that procurement within the organization is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. The background to this deliberate action of giving effect to these PFMA obligations by the board is an important one. The background was the discovery by the board in January 2020, more than a year ago, that the construction contractor bid evaluation process in the organization had a major and potentially corruptive flaw. That a flaw that could corrupt anybody, and probably even the best among us. The process we're referring to allowed the same service provider. We engage you as a service provider. You do the design drawings for a road or bridge, for an infrastructure project. You do the drawings. Develop the technical specifications for the tender for that project. So after you've done the drawings, you also give us the technical specifications that we must advertise as SANRAL to invite bids. The technical specifications under which the bidders must draw up their own specifications to submit to us. And at the same time, determine the technical bid. This is the same person. Determine the technical bid to be recommended for award by the bid evaluation committee if that bid meets other criteria. So you draw the design. After drawing the design, you do the technical specs yourself. After you've done those technical specs, you are the one who comes to SANRAL again to look at the bids and say, yeah, this is the bid that is correct. Now, if that is not conflict of interest, if that does not have a potential to promote corruption, then someone must tell me that we are crazy as this board. On January 28, 2020, the SANRAL board adopted a resolution based on this realization that the consultants who are involved in the design and the development of technical specifications should not be involved in the evaluation of technical specifications. Of technical submissions by bidders. He said, no. Let them design, let them come up with the specifications, and they must then go home. Let another independent engineering consultant be the one who will then look at the bids and make a recommendation. Because what would stop me, after having designed the road or the bridge, after creating the specifications, what would stop me from going to Mr. Matosa and saying to him, listen, I designed this thing, I created these specs, I'm the one who is going to advise the bid evaluation committee at SANRAL who to choose. What would stop me from talking to him and telling him how to prepare his technical submission? That is the job of a board. That's the job of an accounting authority. To look for weaknesses which might place the organization in a compromised situation. And I dare say, at SANRAL over the years, we've had particular contractors dominating our awards to a point where in some of the parts of the country, we are called as SANRAL the name of a major contractor in this country, because every corner you turn, that contractor is in charge of SANRAL's projects. Now, it is us who give these contractors these tenders, so we cannot blame them. But the best we can do is some self-introspection and check what weaknesses in our own system and internal controls lead to that kind of situation. Previously, design consultants were part of the technical evaluation panel that made a recommendation on the technical part of the tender to the bid evaluation committee. The rationale for the resolution was to ensure that there was a separation and segregation of duties, which is a well-known governance principle aimed at having more than one person or body, and not the same person or body, completing a task in circumstances where irregularities could arise. It is an appropriate control measure that is used to prevent collusion, fraud, conflict of interest, misuse of information, and corruption. And that's what boards are supposed to do, especially in the wake of the Zondo Commission and the various reports it is busy churning out. It is an important measure because the seemingly innocuous and seemingly innocent process outlined above of one person doing all those things is extremely dangerous in that it effectively makes the service provider concerned almost the sole determiner of who ends up getting SANRAL's construction tenders. It flies in the face of a fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective procurement. In that circumstance, no one could ever guarantee that no collusion may have taken place between the service provider concerned and the bidder, determined by that service provider to be technically superior to any other, and therefore effectively the bidder for onward recommendation by the bid evaluation committee. Now, as an internal control to avoid possible collusion and corruption between the design consultants and bidders, and in line with its obligations to ensure adequate internal controls to protect the organization, the board took the resolution referred to above to separate the service provider who draws our designs and specifications from the one who recommends the most appropriate technical bid. The board instructed management to ensure that, as an internal control, these two processes, namely designing drawings and developing technical specs on the one hand, and determining which bidder meets those specs on the other hand, were carried out by two different service providers. This was primarily to avoid the obvious conflict of interest and possible corruption. We are here today partly because, for reasons yet to be objectively determined, more than a year down the line, the board discovered that that separation was not effected, thus violating an internal control, and so effectively rendering irregular the awards the board was asked to note by MBEC. Contrary to the board's instruction, in all the tenders at issue, the designer of the projects and the developer of the technical specs was also the same individual or entity which decided on the technical bid to be considered for award. That is what we have an issue with. In the light of that violation of a crucial internal control, and in line with its fiduciary responsibility, the board had no option but to refuse to sanction the planned awards. If the board had sanctioned the proposed awards, it would have ignored its own resolution and internal control, thus attracting an adverse audit finding against the organization. And you might know that in terms of the Public Audit Amendment Act, the Auditor General could ask us to repay all those millions in our individual and collective capacities as this board if there was a finding of irregularity, material irregularity. In 3 of the 5 cases, there were other compelling reasons for the board's refusal to endorse award recommendations. We therefore now list the specific lapses and violations relating to specific tenders which led to the board's obligation not to endorse any of the 5 bids for award. It is important, as we do so, to reiterate that not all awards are tabled at board for noting, but only those above the 750 million rand threshold, under which all the tenders below fall. And to Wild Coast Mtento Bridge. The first reason is the one that is common to all. I'm not going to bore you with it again, namely the design consultants and the extent of their involvement. The next thing there is a bid that should have been considered as non-responsive and therefore disqualified because it was not submitted in the prescribed and required format in terms of the specifications was accepted. It should not have been accepted. Another thing, the specifications included an increase in the scope of works by virtue of additional roads that were originally planned for community development projects in order to accommodate the 30% subcontracting requirement. This resulted in a deviation from the 30% subcontracting, and as a consequence, there was no 30% subcontracting on the actual project. The deviation was done without the requisite board approval, and therefore it was irregular. The people who allowed this were not authorized by the board to remove that 30%. And as I have said, we would have walked into a lion's den in Mtento if we got there and said there's no 30% subcontracting. And to hide the fact that that 30% is gone, we are told about community development projects, which are done by SANRAL anyway. Now they are put in this whole thing, in the main contract. And we ask ourselves, because that is not how it is done, why was that done? And also, there are certain concessions that were made and allowed with regards to one of the bidders. And these concessions are, ordinarily, we require that we retain some of the monies we pay to you as insurance against shoddy work or against you not completing the project and so on. You know about retention. But we allowed in one of these, in this tender, our own structures allowed the situation where one of the bidders said, we won't give you, we won't do retention. We will give you guarantees, but those guarantees are not even secured. And we allowed that. Whereas it did not apply to other bidders. And as you might know, fairness requires that you treat all bidders exactly the same way. With the Matatiele rehabilitation, the R56, it's that big board resolution that applies. With the Ashburton interchange, we found that a bidder who was not supposed to be disqualified was actually disqualified. It would therefore be the height of imprudence for the board to allow the awarding of such a tender when the litigation risks from the disqualified bidder are material. And of course, the board resolution there was also ignored. Ibitlute, the board resolution was ignored. And finally, the GFIP tender. We've already spoken about the reduction of 30% to 15%, which meant close to R1 billion was lost, would have been lost to SMMEs and ordinary people. And of course, the big resolution has also been violated. And now I conclude. In conclusion, this board is as concerned as everyone in the industry that the cancellation of these tenders will delay the implementation of critical infrastructure projects and possibly impact the construction industry. However, it cannot be said that governance and procurement processes must be compromised at all and any cost. The SOE sector is still reeling from the consequences of cutting corners. Short memories in this regard are unfortunate. To mitigate the lost time and opportunities, and as instructed by the minister, we have also, as this board, instructed management to create the necessary conditions for these tenders to be re-advertised legally and allocated within the next 4 months. That is what we decided as the board. And I emphasize within the next 4 months, not in 4 months. Pursuant to ensuring the independence and integrity of a process which has been obviously, based on what we now know, internally compromised, the board has also resolved to secure the assistance of an independent public institution with infrastructure procurement expertise to assist with the process of getting the 5 tenders advertised, evaluated, and adjudicated upon for recommendation of award to the board. This whole process has been soiled, its integrity has been compromised internally within SANRAL. We are clear as this board that there's prima facie evidence of people speaking to the very bidders from inside SANRAL based on the articles we are seeing. And therefore, we've decided that the procurement of these 5 tenders moving forward will be given to an independent public entity with infrastructure procurement expertise to handle this thing cleanly and to come to us with recommendations. The SANRAL board is determined to get to the bottom of the lapses and irregularities highlighted and follow up with the relevant consequence management. As I said earlier on, we don't know why some of these things have been done. We are going to look at it objectively, and we are going to act in line with our obligation to act in law against some of these. SANRAL remains committed to contributing to the development of the nation and its communities. This board is acutely aware of the role SANRAL plays as a catalyst to drive the economy and the construction industry with projects and work on the national road network and any other network determined by the minister. The board is confident that SANRAL has a professional and competent workforce which can deliver good quality roads, which are critically important to provide access and mobility along strategic corridors crisscrossing the country. The board is also passionate about real and effective transformation across all the sectors in the road construction value chain. I thank you all.
Thank you, Chairperson. That was comprehensive. I'm going to invite questions from our friends in the fourth estate. There are media reps in this room, and there are questions that are also coming virtually. I do have colleagues who are assisting me with the questions that are being posed online. But let us start here. I will take 3 questions. Let's take questions in batches of 3. Roy, please identify yourself and the media house you represent. There's the mic.
Thank you. Roy Kane from MoneyWeb. If you could just clear up, I'm a bit confused from statements that were said earlier that there was no corruption involved with these projects and linked to the cancellation of them, which was a statement made by a SANRAL spokesperson. There have been a lot of comments made with regards to the Zondo Commission and corruption and all the rest of it. Is there suspicion of corruption or is there not?
Thank you. I think the question is clear. We note it. I'm sure Chair will respond to that. It's the board's press conference. Next question. Right, we don't seem to have any question. There was one question, Chair, that came virtually asking about the way forward, and I think you've addressed that within the next 4 months, board has instructed management to ensure that these are re-advertised and within 4 months allocated. Chair, if you can respond to Roy Cooking's question.
No coordination, okay. The media is on the podium. You can see you are not used to this thing.
Indeed, Minister, indeed. Roy, thank you for the question. We have outlined the reasons why we did not endorse the proposed award of the tenders. I am sure you've got that. Now, as a board, you don't act only when there is corruption. You also act to avoid corruption. When you find something that is potentially corruptive, that can lead to corruption, the PFMA requires that you set up an internal control to stop that. And if an internal control is not implemented, it is a violation from an audit point of view, and you therefore may not allow that should stand. We do not know whether there's been corruption involved in this, but we do know that an internal control that was intended to ensure that no semblance of corruption can happen was not respected. And therefore, we cannot guarantee as this board that there was no corruption, in the same way that we cannot say conclusively that there was corruption. It is an internal control that was violated, that we are responding to, and that we are compelled to respond to. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe you shouldn't go back to your seat. There's another question for you, Chair. Given the apparent breakdown of trust between the board and the SANRAL management team, when can we expect the appointment of a permanent CO, a position that has been vacant since late last year? Can you confirm that this is a board priority as it clearly should be? The next one, given the environment of rising input building costs, does SANRAL anticipate bids which will cost more as the tender is being relaunched? And will it have the budget to cover these projects?
Thank you very much. The process to appoint a permanent CEO is a process in motion. And to the extent that it goes way beyond the board, one cannot give any specific date. But it is a process that is fairly advanced in terms of where it is. There is no breakdown of trust between the management and the board of SANRAL. Tenders are not handled by the entire management of SANRAL. Tenders are handled by very, very few individuals within SANRAL. And even between those individuals and the board, as matters stand in relation to these matters, there is no breakdown of trust. There are questions to be answered. There are questions to be answered. And there will be an objective process to determine where things went wrong. And if anyone is found to have willfully and grossly negligently decided to ignore this critical board resolution, the necessary consequence management will follow. But there is absolutely no breakdown in trust. There are lots of things that the board would like to see done that are not done. This is not the first one. And they do not automatically equate to a breakdown in trust between the two. The relationship between a board and management is necessarily one of robust engagement and interrogation throughout. And all of that never equals a breakdown in trust. Do we anticipate future bids costing more? Inflation is a reality of life in a capitalist society. The prices of goods keep on going up. But when, as a board, you are confronted with the kinds of challenges we have been confronted with, it's not your duty to say, if we don't award these, the prices will go up, therefore we will award them even if the law does not allow us to. The people who worry about monies are obviously those who are entrusted with getting monies, for some of this work. We as the board, when we are confronted with a tender, we put our money and resource mobilization responsibilities there, and we focus on the integrity of the process. If we ever said, anyway, No, because the monies were going to go higher, we decided to compromise on the integrity of the process. This gentleman behind me here would fire us at 12 midnight. And I would imagine he himself would be fired at 12 midnight. Because it is his duty to make sure that we don't do what I have just said we're not supposed to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There's two more questions. Are you at liberty, Chair, to disclose the identity of the independent public entity that will help with the new tender process? The next question, clarity is needed on the re-advertisement within 4 months. Are you saying these are going to be advertised, adjudicated, and awarded within 4 months?
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I am not at liberty to disclose the independent public entity we have in mind. And I can tell you that we've already decided on the entity. The difficulty is that we have not as yet made contact with and reached agreement with that entity. And you know, this matter is so controversial right now in the South African public domain. And to include the name of that entity without us having done the proper protocols would be to place that entity in a very invidious and unsavory position. And so we are not at liberty, regrettably so, to disclose the name right now. Within 4 months, is that feasible? I imagine that is what the question is saying. That is the instruction we've given our management. And the reason why we have said this must be concluded within 4 months is really that all the work has already been done. All the work has already been done. This would not be starting afresh with designs, drawing up of specifications and so on. All that would be done is to review the specifications to ensure that some of the lapses that we've identified are done away with, and indeed to advertise. And we expect that within a month of the advert, the law allows for 21 days, but I'd imagine the complexity and so on would allow maybe a month, depending on what the entity concerned wants to advise. Within a month, we could get to evaluation and adjudication, especially if that entity does nothing but focus on this. So we think it is possible. We do want to say, if there are compelling reasons for this not to be done within 4 months, we would not be stubborn and rush this for the sake of rushing it. But we have listened to our minister, who has said to us, act Freestad, as far as this matter is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We have a question that relates to supply chain. You may want them to respond. Has SANRAL previously awarded to contractors and subcontractors?
I don't understand the question, but I think since it sounds like it talks about operational SCM issues. The acting CEO and her management on the supply chain management side might be able to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. My understanding of the question is, does SANRAL award to the main contractor and subcontractor? So the current process that I understand, and I will call in my Chief Procurement Officer, that the main contractor is handled by SANRAL in terms of the procurement process, and the subcontracting is handled by the main contractor. And it has never happened that we award the subcontracting, so it's handled by the main contractor.
Thanks. Anything to add there, Inba? Cover. Okay, I go back to Roy. Any other question in this building? Roy, you've got a follow-up question?
Yeah, just waiting for it to come up.
There are a few others. In cancelling these adjudicated tenders, has SANRAL conducted a thorough review of all the tenders since the board resolution was made in January 2020? And therefore there will not be any further cancellations. So my question was really, will there be any further cancellations, or have you completed this process of looking at all these tenders that didn't comply with the board resolution? Just also with regard to the re-advertising the cancelled tenders within 4 months, I'm led to believe that in terms of the Public Finance Management Act, it requires that a cancelled tender cannot be advertised within 6 months of its cancellation. How would you actually get around that? We leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay, whilst Chair is preparing to answer these, there are reporters whose hands are raised. Please raise your questions in the chat, as you may not be audible. And then I've got colleagues who are participating in the chat. They will alert me about those questions. Chair, over to you.
Thank you very much. Roy, that's a question we tread, your first question right now, as this board. Because, as indicated, tenders below 750 million rand never get to be seen by the board in terms of deep detail. We only get to know that they were awarded. Our management reports regularly to the board about tenders awarded. But we do not probe in the manner that we have to probe when we are dealing with those above 750 million rand. So that is a question we have asked our acting CEO, and we have said to the acting CEO, to the extent that there might be those that were awarded without recognizing the board resolution, we need to know about them, and management knows what to do in terms of supply chain management processes. And here you are talking questions of condonation and so on, because as the board, we did not know about them. But once we get to know about them, it is management itself which must then decide what approach it wants to make to the board. And we cannot preempt that. We are waiting. And indeed, we will let you know should there be any. With regard to those that must come to the board, if there are any that have not yet come to the board, and where this resolution has not been implemented, we are publicly rejecting them here and now, because consistency is part of the requirements of being a board. And therefore, our decision in relation to this will apply mutatis mutandis to any other that is brought to us, if our resolution has not been observed. I must be honest, this 6 months requirement is something that I am not aware of. But the supply chain management experts, Imba is right behind you, Rob. I'm sure, Imba, you can come forward and assist in answering that question. But in my experience, I've not come across this. Remember, I'm quite young. I've never had these kinds of challenges we're facing right now as this board. Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. All protocol observed. Mr. Cocaine, that requirement was indeed a requirement of the Construction Industry Development Board regulations. It has been withdrawn, and I think the reason for that requirement used to be that you can't just put out a tender after it's been cancelled without looking at the specification, that the specification actually caused or is one of the causes of the cancellation. So the requirement has been withdrawn, so we can proceed with advertisement. Thanks.
Thank you, Inba. I don't have any further questions online. I think we have exhaustively dealt with the issues, and I'm going to ask the Minister to give a closing remark, and then we adjourn. Minister.
Sleeping on the job.
Hey, sorry, Minister.
I think the reason why we've got boards and in terms of overseeing our entities is to have people who are capable and to be in a position to speak for themselves about the decisions they have taken and to understand the veracity of the decisions they have taken, the material effect on the environment we are in. Because boards don't just take decisions easily. They have to explain those decisions. It's not the job of the minister, because most of the time the questions come to the minister about a whole lot of issues that happen in the space of the board. And it is therefore important that we deal with that. It helps us in many ways in terms of dealing with perceptions, but also the media is fed undercurrent by faceless people. We are a public entity and we're public representatives, and we've got to account and explain ourselves. It's like your media, somebody tells you that Mbalula was expelled the cabinet, and then you believe that, you write it. Then you take yourself serious. You are a very reputable journalist. I mean, you should know as an editor that such nonsense can't happen in cabinet. It's not even in a spaza shop. A person get to be treated like what it is said. And cabinet doesn't operate that way. And you are free to lie with your source, because you know we are constrained by the law, because we can't talk about cabinet issues. in public. We're constrained. So you are free to go to Roy. I like Roy. Roy doesn't take sides, he just writes. You know, he writes what you tell him about e-tolls, he writes. But he writes with facts in terms of what he's been told. It's not embedded, you know. So some embedded journalist will write a story even if they tell you that there is going to be a coup d'etat tonight. You'll write, Ramaphosa will be removed tonight. And then you don't check, you don't do anything, you do. So I'm happy that when we are confronted with such issues, we should be able to respond and to explain and to put the record straight in terms of what is happening. And the decisions that have been taken are decisions that are huge and have got an impact on our plans in terms of infrastructure of this country. And they can't be lightly taken, you know. And equally, if they sleep on the job with those major contracts, some of us, we might not be around, but they will come to bite them. Because some tenderpreneur is putting pressure on you to do illegal things. And then we are sitting with big contracts at Prasa, Shifambo, Siabangena, awarded 4 billion, 6 billion irregularly. You are going to award 17 billion tenders irregularly. What impact is it going to have in terms of this government going into the future? And then I arrived here, and then at Prasa they were giving one person, happy to give one contractor, if it's a general overall contract, 12 billion. Mbo. And then I said, no, you can't do that. Break it down. There are many people here, we must create jobs here. You can't just give one man 12 billion contract. It's for life, most. That's where the problem is. So these things have got to be examined by boards and take sensible decisions. Not everybody will be happy if you had already lined up your pocket that you are in. They will work around the clock. The board is useless. The board is undermining infrastructure projects. And I indeed asked the chair about this particular matter. I said, but how come the board takes such a huge step? And they don't have to consult me. They don't have to tell me because I'm not involved with the tenders. But we are driving a bigger project of infrastructure development for this country, which is a cornerstone and pillar of our recovery plan. And most of these projects are lying with us in our portfolio where we are deployed of transport. So I think we will meet with the infrastructure people, Sputla Ramkhopa, the head of infrastructure, and the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, to also take them on board and go even deeper in terms of the detailed plan of these 4 months. What is going to happen and how to avoid. And even the brief in terms of the independent people who are now going to oversee the fast tracking and the implementation of the awarding of these bigger contracts. So that is how we're going to go about in terms of this matter. And if there are questions, I think you know SANRAL is here, very capable chairperson. Most of you, for the first time, you see Mr. Mahambi. So you saw him today, so he can speak for his board. And you've got the acting CEO, and then I hope we have the CEO soon, as it is expected. But thank you very much, and thank you, Chairperson of the board, and members of the board, and the group CEO, and members of the media, and those who are interested in the story. We have given you the facts today, and from the horse's mouth. And thank you for coming and for honoring us with your presence. Thank you very much.
So you want to